we're operational.
Okay.
So, you were saying about, you were born in Decatur?
Mm-hmm. 1929 brought the Depression.
We are interviewing the Reverend Austin Ford.
Andrea Young and Harvey Newman. So what was Atlanta like then, as you recall?
Well, let's see. By the time I was really registering Atlanta, I guess it was in the 30s. And I didn't see much of Atlanta. I saw Decatur, which was a country town in those days. And with all the accoutrements that are attached to a southern country town.
Like, such as?
Well, it was very conservative. Although there were, of course, Agnes Scott College was there, Columbia Seminary, and Emory was on the fringe of things. So there was a liberal community. And I think it was, I think I was 10 when I first heard about one of the teachers from Agnes Scott meeting with some group of ladies saying, well, of course we'll have intermarriage. It's inevitable. And that's the first time I ever remember hearing about racial intermarriage, but things of that sort. But they did influence the community somewhat. So I suppose it wasn't quite typical of the South, but it was very conservative and old-fashioned and racist and all the bad things as well as the good things. Did you ever come across Roy Blunt, the humorist?
Sure.
He grew up in Decatur, and he hated it. He wrote a book about Decatur. And he called it "Be Sweet," because that's what his mother said every morning when he left the house. And to show you how Decatur has changed, the city council wrote to him and said, "We're not the way we used to be. You would like it now. We want you to come for a visit." So he did, and they said, "We've had a black woman mayor and a communist mayor. We have a large lesbian population, and you would like it. You would like it." And he wrote back to say he had been there and he did like it. It's the kind of place everybody wants to live.
Well, he comes back for the book festival.
I suppose he does.
Most
yeah.
falls.
I think I heard on the news recently that he'd been there.
So that's been an important event. Did you get outside the South to help change your perspective?
No. I never left the South except for vacations and things.
Okay.
All my education was in the South.
And how did you start out in your profession? How did you get started in the priesthood?
Well, I just went to college and seminary and then got ordained.
Sewanee?
I was at Sewanee in 50. Yeah.
Where'd you go to seminary?
Sewanee, University of the South. I was there when the big eruption came. The first black student applied for the seminary and was turned down. And that was very interesting and very instructive, too, because you saw, that was 52. And you saw all the things that were going to happen later happened there. I mean, the faculty all resigned in protest of the refusal of the trustees to take him in, and they dynamited the dean's car. All kinds of things happened. Some bishop paid some student to steal the diaries of the professor of New Testament, who I think did lead a rather extraordinary life. I never knew what was in the diaries. But at any rate, in other words, they were just after people. And that was, the professor of New Testament was Robert Grant, who was a great scholar. And they fired him, and he was immediately taken on by the University of Chicago. And he would come down to Tullahoma on the weekends, and we had instructions, and the New Testament instructions all took place in the train station at Tullahoma, and then he'd get on the train and go back. So that was
So the faculty were united in thinking that the black students should be admitted?
Yes, the faculty resigned in protest of that refusal. But the things just went on. there was no public attention paid to this, and and toward the end of the year, the students were all leaving, and either to be ordained or to find another seminary, because that one was obviously going to close, or looked as if it would. And Dean Pike, who was dean of the cathedral in New York, was to receive an honorary degree at Sewanee that year, and he blew it up. He said he would not accept a degree in white divinity. And because he was a genius at getting press, so
in white divinity?
He wouldn't have a degree in white divinity. So then the New York Times, then the press got hold of it, and everything blew up everywhere, and the trustees got together and reversed their decision and so on.
Just because because of the public embarrassment.
Because of the public embarrassment and the outcry from the public, which came belatedly. But I think the seminary opened that fall with new faculty that they had recruited from various sectors, and I think 8 students. There'd been, I think, 85 before. But the black student came. He was from Savannah, and it was the Bishop of Georgia who wanted him there, and he was he was full of success, so he was fine. He made it all right.
So did the seminary recover?
It has completely recovered now, but I mean, the quality of faculty was obviously not very inspiring. I mean, these were all people who were willing to take jobs that had been vacated by other people who had left on a moral issue. So not very inspiring in that way. But,
so where did the student end up? Do you remember his name?
I don't remember. See, I was gone by then, and I never really knew him. But just the reports I heard was I guess he went back to his diocese, which was South Georgia, was London.
So when you finished seminary, you returned here?
I came to Atlanta, and I was assistant at St. Luke's.
Okay.
And and I was there a few years, and then I was at a parish out near Emory for the next stretch. And then I went downtown to Lana Mae's house.
So why'd you come back to Atlanta?
Well, you did. I mean, you were sent to seminary by your diocese, and so that was the normal thing. You came back to the diocese, and they gave you a job.
You'll have to forgive the two of us are Congregationalists. We're UCC folks, so the Episcopal system is a little bit different.
Entirely, yes, I would think. Yes, you're used to running your churches.
So after, when you came back to Atlanta, St. Luke's is...
It's on Peachtree in the 435 Peachtree.
So what was that congregation like?
Well, it was all white. It was a very, very happy congregation. A lot of sort of poor folks who lived in the downtown hotels, the Kimball House and things like that, long since torn down. But that church was interestingly organized because they had groups for people. There were about 2,000 communicants, and they had groups for people who were really, although they never admitted that, based on their income, their finances, their situation in life. And so they were very happy. You know, there were like a lot of little churches within that church, and they all loved the church, and they loved the groups, the people they knew, and so on. It was really a very sort of creative environment.
St. Luke's has, in the years, more recent years, and in the distant past, had priests who were quite progressive and liberal by most Southern standards. Was that the case?
Yes, Dr. Have I broken it?
No, it just slipped through the hole.
Dr. Wilmer was there, and he's the one that built the church in 1907, and he became quite famous. He joined the streetcar strike in long about then. He met with a group of people in the basement of that church every Monday, including Rabbi Marks and I forget who else. They drafted the first law forbidding child labor in Georgia, which got him in trouble from then on, because of course the mills were furious. They were used to hiring 8 and 10-year-old children, and there were a lot of the mill owners in that church. But the prostitution industry was very strong in Atlanta, and he decided he was going to do something to rescue the prostitutes, and he set up these halfway houses and clinics and so on. And one of his assistants was a man named Gribben, who was many years later Bishop of Western North Carolina, and he told me this story. He was the assistant of Dr. Wilmer, and he said there were so many people who were upset with Dr. Wilmer about his campaign against, apparently there was a lot of investment in the prostitution industry. And he said he remembered the senior warden coming in and saying, Dr. Wilmer, you have got to stop this campaign based on your opposition to prostitution. And he said, Mr. Woodard, I will discuss the question of the finances of this church, which I suppose you have in mind, on any other basis than that of how it's affected by the industry of prostitution. But apparently so many people got angry that they couldn't afford to pay the assistant. So those were very exciting days, and long before my time. But he adopted a black man. There's a big plaque to him in the entrance to that church, Walter Blano, and he was way ahead of his time, although his father was the Bishop of Alabama during the Confederacy and went to prison because he wouldn't stop praying for the Confederacy.
This was Wilmer's father?
Uh-huh.
I had never heard that.
Bishop Wilmer of Alabama.
I had never heard that.
Uh-huh. And so, and then I think a big change came at the end of the First World War. And they had a big gathering in Atlanta, which I guess was one of the things that led to the formation of the Southern Regional Council. But the motto, because you see, the blacks had gone off and come back for the first time with some awareness of what was going on in the rest of the world. And the motto was, if you want to know what the colored people want, you must ask the colored people. So that was a big move too. But of course I never knew Dr. Wilmer, but I knew Bishop Walker, who was there in the 30s. And he was really a socialist. He was a great friend of the Red Dean of Canterbury, and he used to bring him here to speak and all that. He said people needed to hear more than one side of the economic question. And he died in 1952 as Bishop of Atlanta by then. And by that time he had been subpoenaed by the McCarthy period to prove he wasn't a communist. But he died in the middle of that, and he was succeeded by his exact opposite, Bishop Waltower, who's a complete right-winger. But they had the same initials, John Waltower and John Walker. And he was summoned to testify to the McCarthy hearings. He said, no, I can't imagine. He said, they're looking into whether I'm a communist. He had lunch at the driving club every day, and so the last thing he was a communist. But he had to go and prove his good faith at McCarthy hearings.
So was that the bishop when you came?
He was my bishop, who sent me to seminary. Mm-hmm. But Waltower was the bishop by the time I came out. He had really, he wasn't. He fired me because of stuff we got into fight over, Sewanee and that business up there. And he was entirely with the trustees in eliminating that black man. And he told me he wasn't going to ordain me. But this was, he himself telephoned to me up there and said I'd have to look for another diocese. And I heard a voice, the only time I think I ever heard a voice, it said, just don't tell anybody this. So I came home for Christmas. I didn't tell anybody, my parents, anybody. And on January the 6th, he died. And I didn't say anything. He hadn't put anything in writing, apparently. So after I got safely ordained by Bishop Claiborne, who was by then the bishop, I told him to be careful of me. Because the last bishop that got in my way was dead now. Yes. So that's my background, anyway.
So St. Luke's was still a fairly liberal parish when you showed
I wouldn't say it was. I mean, it was, the people were happy and broad-minded and so on. But I never remember there talking about social questions or anything like that in the 2 or 3 years I was there. Of course, people didn't much, until we really got into the civil rights issue. So I remember I grew up in the Episcopal Church there in Decatur, and the rector there was a great friend of the Archdeacon for black work. He was the black priest from down in Fort Valley, and he was always there preaching and things of that kind. But 10 years later, that would have been controversial. Once the big issues were bruited, and then they became issues. But until then, I think most white Southerners of sort of privileged situations weren't worried about anything. Later on, they got worried, but at that time, they weren't.
One of the things that I seem to recall is that you were a signer of the manifesto of 50 ministers.
Yes, I remember that.
About the school desegregation issue. Tell us a little bit about the background of the manifesto itself and how you came to be a part of signing that, which had to be a rather courageous act.
I don't remember very much about it. I remember that we signed and that they made a lot over it. And I didn't think it amounted to very much, did it?
Well, what I've said about it is that it did provide support for the mayor in his efforts to desegregate Atlanta's public schools peacefully. And there were some conservative ministers who obviously took an opposite view that the schools should not be desegregated, but 49, you and 49 others were willing to put your names on a line that said you favored this public policy.
I just years later they had, what year was that? You remember? It was
1906. What was it?
Because they had something like a 50th anniversary.
We did, and that's the last time I remember being with you.
I declined to go because I thought they were just celebrating something that didn't amount to much.
This was the Regional Council of Churches trying to.
Oh, I remember. Yes, the Atlanta Council of Churches.
Right.
And they were totally segregated themselves. It was an amazing thing. They wanted the schools desegregated, but everything to do with the Atlanta Council of Churches was completely segregated.
Well, they had made a little progress by the 50th anniversary.
That's right.
So when you signed the manifesto in support of desegregating the schools, the Atlanta Council of Churches
which sponsored it, was not desegregated itself. It always seemed sort of hypocritical.
Had you tried to get them to desegregate?
I wasn't that important. I mean, I was just a young priest. I didn't have anything to do with anything. I felt strongly about things, but I wasn't an influential person in any way.
So that was in contrast, I guess, to some of the things where churches did quite the opposite. I was reading in your book about the this book White Flight about how the churches in Kirkwood, organized to oppose neighborhood integration.
The First Baptist Church, though, had those people arrested, came. And they went to prison. They really prosecuted them and locked them up.
First Baptist Church of Atlanta.
In Atlanta, yeah.
What was that?
Well, that's when the blacks first began to just sort of appear on Sunday mornings in churches. And when they appeared at the First Baptist Church, they called the police and had them arrested, because by that time there was some kind of a law in Georgia about disturbing public worship. And on that basis they were prosecuted. That was an amazing thing.
So coming to church, if you're a black person and you go to a white church, that was disturbing public worship?
It was. I think that's the only church that did that, so far as I ever heard. But because they went to all the churches just to make their presence known and felt. And I guess most places they were just treated civilly anyway, so far as I ever heard. But that one instance, and of course that church was always extremely conservative, and they finally, just closed down and tore the building down because they said there were so many homosexuals in Midtown.
And they sold it quite profitably, actually.
Yes, and then they tore that building down, which we really, it was too bad. That was a marvelous building.
It was.
And they offered it to the Woodruff Art Center, and they wouldn't take it. It would have been a wonderful concert hall. But anyway,
I was only in it one time. Thought it was a very lovely sanctuary.
It was beautifully built, and I think it's built in about the same time as the Fox in the 1920s. And wonderful construction and all that. But
So
Atlanta's great at tearing things down.
They relocated the congregation?
Yes, it's way out
Dunwoody now.
out there somewhere. But
Right.
his son has become quite a liberal, I think, and has a church in Buckhead called the Buckhead Church or something like that. I think that's his son.
Andy. He has multiple churches, and he appears in a hologram in the other 2 or 3 locations.
Is that the way it works?
If he's not physically present, his hologram is present on the stage. It's quite impressive.
I hear people saying very good things about him. I don't know anything about it myself, but
It's a matter of taste, I suppose.
oh yeah, yes, it's not what I'm used to, but yeah, but I think you don't dress up to go there and things like
That's right. It's a very casual. He shows up on stage in blue jeans.
But he broke with his father over his positions and all that, because his father's still going.
He broke with his father initially over the issue of divorce.
Yeah, his father had. His mother had divorced his father over.
His father would expel you from membership in the church if you were divorcing, and then when he decided to get a divorce because his wife couldn't stand him anymore, that was different. And so he made an exception for his case, and Andy thought that was a little hypocritical and went a different path. So,
Well, the churches have certainly broadened their attitude on these matters, haven't they? All of them have, I guess.
So what vision led you to Emmaus House?
Well, I was just really very much involved with once the the 54 decision came, and I got involved with trying to integrate schools and things like that into DeKalb County, where I was living then, and got more and more involved, and I got involved with the Georgia Council on Human Relations, and went all around the state meeting with interracial groups and so on, and that was very educational for me, and I loved it all. It was really, we went.
What was the goal of the meetings, the Georgia Council?
Well, it was very what you call Mickey Mouse now. What we did was to form in as many communities as we could interracial groups, and Sometimes it would be the banker and his chauffeur, but still. You would just meet and talk about what you could do to improve the situation of blacks in that community. And and it was, goodness, certainly, you could get it in many communities. You couldn't find any place to have an interracial meeting. But it was. I remember when we couldn't find a place in Albany to meet, and so we met at Radium Springs, and they came and knocked out all the windows and bashed down the doors and so on. We had to get out of there in a hurry. But they were just so frightened of anything to do with that touched on the interracial questions. And registering people to vote, which you would do in a country church, using flashlights. It was so dangerous. What would happen? So I was just doing a lot of that. And then and I had been pretty active in trying to get the Diocese of Atlanta to do more than it was doing, and kept introducing things at the diocese annual meetings and so on, especially about Love at School, which was the Episcopal high school in those days, and we would always bring up resolutions calling on the diocese to make it known publicly that school was not racially segregated. And the bishop would always rule it out of order on the grounds that it was not segregated, and everybody knew it. The blacks just didn't want to go there. And then, of course, Lovett blew up when your family applied for admission there. And I knew, I guess, I don't know how I knew, maybe from your mother. Anyway, I knew that it was going to happen. No, I knew it from Coretta.
Yeah, I think
it wasn't
we
you. It was the King children.
Yeah,
it was the King children.
And Trinity actually surprised my parents and let us in.
Yes, and then that's right. And they let the King children in too, didn't they?
Well, I think that Lovett did not initially. Whoever applied, it was either the Abernathys or the Kings that applied.
It was the Kings who applied.
And I think initially they did not get in.
They were refused. Yeah. And then the Diocese of Atlanta really blew up over that, because I knew it was going to happen, and I saw to it that the bishop knew it too, and then he later denied that he knew it, but it was true. And but then Ralph McGill, who was editor of the Constitution and was very active at the cathedral, wrote an article for the diocesan paper accusing the diocesan authorities of hypocrisy. And then that I think they burned the issue anyway. It never went out, and he resigned from the cathedral over that, and that made a big stir. And then I don't know whether they had a stroke of conscience or what, but they did regret what they had done, and they divorced themselves from Lovett School and withdrew from ownership of it. And
the Episcopal diocese.
The diocese, yeah. And but there were just a lot of things like that going on, Those were unhappy days, but very exciting, I have to admit. Anyway, I just got more and more interested in what was happening, and I was especially interested in welfare rights, because I saw all over the state the National Welfare Rights Organization was beginning to organize around, and they were wonderful. They really knew how to organize, and so one way or the other. And then the bishop said to me, "You are the one who keeps pushing the diocese to do things you think they ought to do. Why don't you just go and do something yourself?" So And I had, that was not an entirely new thought to me, and I said, well, if you will, if it's going to be a diocesan institution, I'd be willing to undertake that. But I'd have to have a statement from you saying that that I wouldn't have to have a board of directors, because I knew what happened because I saw in Georgia Council what happened. Every time you wanted to do something really exciting, the board would find it too exciting, wouldn't let you do it. So I got that, and then just went and found a house and moved into it. That was it.
And the house was on Prior Street?
It was Capitol Avenue in those days. And I mean, it was, later became named for the ball player. It's just south end of Capitol Avenue, south of the stadium there, where you used to come to work.
Right.
What do you consider a major legacy of Emmaus House on the city's development?
I don't know. We did a lot with welfare rights, because that was a particular issue of mine, and integration of housing, and trying to get the city to pay more attention to the public schools, because the white schools were half empty, and the black schools, a lot of them in the neighborhoods like that, were on double session, didn't have enough books, and sometimes didn't have blackboards, and and so I was very much interested in that and caught up with that. But Talmadge was our senator at that time, and Jim, what was his name? He was the head of the welfare department, and he was a genuine liberal. And I asked him if we paid for it, if he would be willing to send out a statement with the welfare checks, saying that if people wanted information about their rights as welfare recipients, they should call that number. Well, I thought there'd be a lot of calls, but it never stopped. And I was living alone in that house. There was one telephone. Like thousands of people wanted information about their rights. So we had, in those days, we didn't have food stamps. We had surplus commodities. And if you qualified for that, it was a lot of food, grits and orange juice and cheese and just various things from the Department of Agriculture. But you had to pick it up once a month at the warehouse, and most people who were poor enough to qualify for it didn't have any way to get it. So we had an army of women volunteers who went once a month and picked up the food and delivered it to their families. And so, as an emergency thing, those people met. We got those people together to decide what we were going to do about this avalanche of calls of people needing information about their rights. And from that, we set up what was called the Poverty Rights Office, which is still going. And got volunteers to answer the phone every day and things of that sort. But,
it's still going? Who's running that now?
Well, Dee Weems is still there as a volunteer, and she's been there for 40 years now. But they have two people who are working there full-time on salary. So, and one of them lives there. Do you remember the May Helen Johnson? And this is one of her grandchildren. He lives there and works there. When I retired, I left them alone. I just go there for weddings and funerals, but it's still going. But Talmadge had such a fit about that he came down and started an inquiry, and had the Jim, what's his name, sanctioned for having sent out that letter. Anyway, that was before Talmadge met his doom.
So who were some of the people in the welfare rights organization?
Well, of course, Ethel Matthews was right soon after I went there, I sent out notices saying, we were having meetings of people who were on welfare, and a lot of people wouldn't come because they were afraid of being known to be on welfare, afraid they'd be harassed. And anyway, I can still see her that first night. She said, my children were pulling on my skirt saying, don't you go down there, they'll cancel your check. But she said, I just decided I was just going to come down there and find out what my rights were. And we had a woman from Washington, I forget her name, but she was a
Dorothy Bolden?
What?
Dorothy Bolden?
No, this is a woman from Welfare Rights. Dorothy was maids. She organized the domestic workers. No, this was an organizer from Washington for the Welfare Rights Organization, and she came and she inspired those people so that they had a workshop in Washington for them. I think it went on for 6 weeks or something, and they went, including Ethel Matthews, and they all came home just fired up and knew how to organize. So that's how it got going. You'd have two women with exactly the same situation, maybe living in the same apartment house. A single woman with two children, they'd be getting entirely different welfare checks. And so you go to the welfare department and ask what the regulations were, and they wouldn't tell you. In those days, there was no right, you didn't have any right to information. But we had a good time over that because we got a whole group of people together to go down to the welfare department one day. And we had some practice theater beforehand, and one of the women went down the hall to get a drink of water, but she had a seizure. So everybody fled down the hall to see what was the matter with her. And I picked up the regulation book and left with it. And we refigured everybody's grant. And next time we went down there, we knew what everybody was supposed to be getting. I remember they asked one of those women, it wasn't Miss Matthews, somebody else, how she knew what her grant was supposed to be. And she said, I have a lawyer, and he told me. She didn't have any lawyer, and nobody told her anything. But those were, there was a lot of fun about it too. And so
what was Miss Matthews like?
Oh, she was just, she was unique. How can I describe her? And she was just absolutely determined on every question. And she was intensely intelligent in things that she knew about, and things that she didn't know about, she didn't know much about. But she was totally fearless, and she would, I can't really describe her. She ran for city council, and at first they wouldn't let her run because you had to have, I think, $500 or something to qualify. So she sued, and in the meantime they had realized that was not a very good idea, so they had canceled that requirement. And she did. She got a lot of votes. She didn't get elected, of course, but she really was a good candidate. Anyway, her case was in progress, and it went on all the way to the Supreme Court, by which time Atlanta had changed its regulation. But I can remember what she said, because the Supreme Court announced that it was moot because it had been settled. And she said, moot is one of them 4-letter words. You don't expect the Supreme Court to be using that sort of... Typical.
Moot is a 4-letter word.
And she organized the Tenants United for Fairness, called TUF, because there was the public housing was totally segregated, and so that led to a lot of changes there.
What kind of changes?
Well, they had to integrate, for one thing, which the law had always required them to do, but they hadn't done it. And also they formed tenant councils in every project, so that the tenants had some people, a group of their own residents to turn to when they felt they were not being.
So that was a result of her organizing?
Mm-hmm. She organized TUF, TUF, and Tenants United for Fairness.
Well, that led to the development of Mary Sanfords and Eva Davises and people like that.
Eva Davis was, she was in the Welfare Rights Organization. She lived in East Lake Meadows, and she was very active in that, and of course later on in TUF. But yeah.
Her health has not been good.
But she's still going. I've lost all touch with her.
I haven't seen her in a couple of years, but she and I have been good friends for a long time.
She really is very bright, and she knows a lot about how things work and ought to work.
I love to hear her stories. She'll tell about being in her kitchen out at East Lake Meadows and cooking collards and drinking scotch, and somebody knocks on the door and they said it was the Secret Service and President Carter wants to come see her. And she said, "Oh, go away." They came back and said, "But President Carter wants to meet with you."
He really does?
He really does. And she'll tell it again, but I was just in the kitchen.
I never heard that story. That's wonderful.
She's got a million albums.
It was really, those women were so resourceful, and they knew how to, they either were born knowing how to organize or they learned how.
I thought I knew something about how politics worked until I started working with Mary Sanford out at her project out at Perry Homes.
Yeah.
She taught me some lessons in politics that I've never forgotten.
Yeah, it was. They really did know a lot about how to organize. And, it was. And they got a lot done. They made many changes.
What were some of the changes that came about?
Well, just life got much better in the projects. I mean, they had been bullied so. And you could just be evicted because you were just on the wrong side of some official down there. And now they had those councils. They had really worked for them, and
What do you think has helped make Atlanta different? One of the stories that we're trying to tell is that Atlanta made change in desegregation rather peacefully in comparison to other southern cities. What helped make Atlanta different?
Well, I think a lot of it was simply that the business community here was just determined that they weren't going to have the same kind of trouble they were having in other southern cities, and they weren't necessarily on the right side of any question, but they did want business to thrive, and I think one of the things that helped Atlanta a lot, and it never gets noticed, was Tom Murphy, who was Speaker of the House, and he just did so much to help Atlanta, and he was just a very, I mean, I was more with him all the time, but the last time I saw him, it was something that when at the governor's mansion, and he looked up and said, I thought I'd had you locked up for 26 years. He said, "What's that black preacher doing you always running around with?" I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Murphy, he's out too."
Who was he talking about?
Joe Boone.
Joe Boone.
But he really, for example, when Zell Miller was determined to get there, when Bill Clinton pushed through all that business to cut people off welfare in 5 years, Zell Miller was going to cut him off in 4 or 3 if he could make it, and he finally did. I mean, they got through a waiver from the White House, allowing them to cut people off welfare a year before the rest of the country did. But there was a big to-do over it, and I'll never forget Mr. Murphy coming down into the well of the House, and he burst into tears, and he said, "I've done a lot of damage and a lot of harm in my life, but I had never done anything I thought would hurt children." And he spoke against that. He went to war with Zell Miller. They didn't win, but he cared anyway. But he got to, he pushed through Martyr. He pushed through that Georgia World Congress Center. He really, although he was a rural legislator, he really cared about the city. And I think that had a lot to do with what happened here. And of course, Ivan Allen, once he got over being such a rigid segregationist, I think really wanted the city to become a more loving community.
Why did you say that?
Well, because he really did change his attitude, you know, from the time when he plowed up Peyton Road to keep the blacks from moving and things like that. And I think he sincerely later changed his mind. He worked hard to get Grace Hamilton made Woman of the Year. I remember that. And not that she got it, but but he campaigned for it. And
What about the role of Hartsfield? Do you think he played a role in it?
I'm sure he did. Because he was so intelligent, really, about what the city had to do with it. And of course, he also, you know, Atlanta was more like Birmingham when he took over, because it was just downtown. You know, it was just West End and Kirkwood, and Chief Jenkins told me that he had to join the Klan before he could be hired for the police department, and it was Hartsfield that pushed through the expansion of the city. How they hated that, I don't know. I never knew how he managed it, but he took Buckhead and all that area in, and those people, of course, they ran the city because they were, they owned it, but they didn't live in it. And once they were forced to live in it, they took more responsibility for it.
You said Chief Jenkins told you he had to join the Klan in order to...
Yeah, the policemen all belonged to the Klan. And Atlanta, I think, would have been like Birmingham if we hadn't had that expansion under Hartsfield.
What about Helen Bullard? Did you know her?
Oh, I knew Helen. Yes, goodness. That's we had a big fight though, because Mayor Allen really wanted to close Piedmont Park and put the art center there, and she was very much pushing for that. I remember her saying, "I live on 13th Street. Nobody ever goes to that park." I said, "You don't go to it yourself. You don't know who's in there." But anyway, he lost that. I mean, he didn't. People weren't thinking of giving up Piedmont Park. But that was Helen's idea. That's a painting in my hall there. You'll see it hanging up over the thing. It's something she painted for Grace Hamilton. It's called Grace, Her City. And so, yeah, Helen was.
So how did she become so influential?
Well, she was just very intelligent. She was very. She really cared a lot, and she knew a lot, and she was a liberal by the lights of those days, and she became very much involved with Ivan Allen, and I don't know whether she was chief of staff or not, but she certainly was something impressive in that area and had a big influence on it.
It was an unusual position for a woman at that time.
Very. But she was an unusual woman, and she was very much of a feminist too. She didn't want to go to church because you might hear something from St. Paul.
Yeah, I have my own issues with Paul. So did she not go to church?
No.
So what, any stories about her? Any other interactions?
Well, she was just, she was very good cause except Piedmont Park, but she was very constructive.
So what was her view on desegregation?
Oh, she was very much of a liberal. She had many black friends, and she moved in the black community very comfortably, so she was fine on that issue. And she and Grace Hamilton, I think, probably they were the most, each was the other's closest friend, I
think. From working on issues? Or?
I guess so. Grace, was in that first group of blacks to be elected to the legislature.
Right.
And she's never received her due because she was an elitist in so many ways, I remember when Jesse Jackson came down to campaign against her, he said that area should not be represented by a woman who sat around listening to classical music. But what she specialized in was redistricting.
Right.
And she knew all about it.
Right.
And almost everybody black that ever got elected to anything in this state got elected from a district that she drew. And really, people didn't know what she was doing because she never talked about it. But I remember going to a meeting somewhere, and she said that she could be funny. She said, now the white pins on this map stand for the blacks, and the black pins stand for the whites.
I guess she was eventually defeated by Mabel Thomas.
Yes.
If memory serves me
Oh,
correct.
Yes, she was. And that was
Abel Mabel.
And that, I guess she shouldn't have run, but she should have had another 2 years. And, she was an exceptional person.
I always feel partly responsible for that. Abel Mabel was my student.
You didn't teach her to take drugs, did you?
No, but she claims I was one of the first people to encourage her to run for office, but I didn't mean that office.
Is she in the city council now? She ran. She was in the state legislature.
Yeah, and then she left the legislature and ran against John Lewis.
That's right. She left the legislature when they were going to have random drug testing. I didn't say that. Take that off.
I didn't know that.
One could understand why she ran against John Lewis.
Oh, no.
Maybe she was positioning herself in case he retires.
I think she also has a following,
Right.
Like what's the name who runs the homeless shelter and so on. She's always campaigning for Abel. And she can talk a good liberal line when she wants to. But
well, there's a difference between being vocal on behalf of the poor and being effective.
Exactly so. Exactly so. And
so how do you think the poor people have fared under the
well,
Atlanta has
I'm very upset about them now because they've torn down all the public housing.
Yeah.
And so many have had to leave the city because they have no place to live. And Atlanta doesn't have any Section 8 certificates to give out. So they're down there in Clayton County where they can't use Grady and have no public transportation. And I think Cuomo really is responsible for a lot of that. You know, he started that business, so you had to get rid of public housing instead of fixing it up. But Atlanta had the first public housing in the country, and they tore it down without even putting a plaque up there.
But you also used to be critical of public housing.
Oh, well, I wasn't critical of public housing as an institution, but just the way it was run. But it's just...
The two things that it was never able to do well are provide safety and maintenance.
Well, I think if they had cared more about it, they could have certainly maintained the buildings, and and I don't know.
Well, the administration of the housing authority was so weak for so long.
It certainly was,
and that was worth campaigning against.
But
certainly.
Yeah.
You were considered a success if you were able to retire without an indictment.
Yeah, but why they tore it down without just refurbishing it and making it, I mean, that public housing on Memorial Drive, that was solid brick construction with slate roofs. They had spent $8 million air conditioning 2 or 3 years before. That could have been marvelous housing just for rental. And now there's no place that anybody poor can rent in this city that I know of.
And it's deeply troubling to me, kind of an aside, the national policy debate to slash the federal budget puts the voucher program at risk.
Yeah.
And if cuts are made to that...
Oh, yes, they'll go after that, you know.
Bush tried for 8 years and didn't succeed, but that
it's just really scary what could happen, you know, next year. If that crowd sweeps the government. I just wonder.
But in terms of the issues, now Miss Matthews and the tenant councils became a real electoral power base as well.
Yeah, they did, because they could rally people, and it was and people were very attentive to her and to her crowd, you know, because they were so outspoken and they didn't care whether you liked them or not. In fact, I remember Miss Matthews saying, "I know you don't like me, but I don't live on like. I live on the will of God and the welfare check." That's what she said to that. You know, we had the community health center up there at the end of Prior Street, and it turned out that the director up there had been involved with that program over in Tuskegee where they did the syphilis with the black people, you know. And when that word got out, she organized a big thing up there. She was going to get him fired.
Did she succeed?
I think Emory moved him because it was run by Emory. I sort of steered clear of that because they also didn't want the center giving out birth control information, and I thought that was one of the things they needed to do.
Miss Matthews didn't want them giving out birth
No,
control?
that the welfare rights thought that was an attempt to wipe out the black race,
Right.
and so I just stayed out of that. Birth control was not going to be my issue.
How did you pick your issues?
Well, they were sort of welfare rights and integration of the schools and those things that I cared a lot about.
What did you think about Atlanta's approach to desegregation?
Well, we didn't really desegregate anything, you know, until the 70s. I mean, they put about 8 or 9 students in the high school. and then Atlanta just really didn't do anything. And Dr. Letson, who was the superintendent, when there was federal money for integrating the faculties, and Atlanta lost its ESA funds because he wouldn't do it. And he said to me, I put the best black teachers in the white schools and the worst white teachers in the black schools, and I don't know what else to do. Oh, Lord. But, see, it didn't change until the decision of Judge Smith's decision in '71, which required the city to provide free transportation to any child who wanted to go to a school in which he would be in a minority. So that's how M2M came about. And that was a big plus for poor children in these segregated schools on double session.
Were you involved in the effort that didn't succeed for metropolitan-wide desegregation?
Oh, yes, I certainly was. Because you see, Lonnie King, who was president of the NAACP, made a deal with the, I don't know just how he worked it, but anyway, the NAACP, you see, was the plaintiff in that case, the '59 case, and they withdrew the case in exchange for the right to appoint a certain number of employees for the school system. And so Atlanta wasn't going to do any more about desegregating the schools. And mercy, I couldn't believe this had happened. And I went to New York and met with the people at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. They didn't know it had happened. And in fact, the local chapter got suspended from nationally for having done it. But by that time, the case was out of court. And so the ACLU took on the case and moved to desegregate across district lines. And that was finally lost at the Supreme Court.
So it proceeded on the M2M program in the city.
Uh-huh. But you see, that was running out because after a number of years, there were no longer any schools in which a black child would be in a minority. They were all. And so the M2M was never really an answer to the problem anyway. Busing would have been an answer to the problem, but there was so much hostility to it here that they never did it. And, or maybe they just didn't want to, I don't know. But anyway.
What was the reasoning, as you recall, of why Lonnie settled the Atlanta suit?
I think they wanted jobs. They wanted, they got the right to appoint a great many blacks to jobs, and jobs were needed, and they didn't really care about desegregating the schools. Because, 15 years had gone by without anything being done.
Wasn't that the deal that resulted in Dr. Krim becoming the superintendent?
Dr. Krim, I don't know whether see, that deal didn't fly because the ACLU immediately instituted a new case, and the local chapter never got the local NAACP chapter never got what they wanted. They never got those jobs. But Dr. Mays was chairman of the school board by that time, and he didn't want integration of schools either. And in fact, he finally went to the Supreme Court and said that. But and that was really key, I think, to the fact that because the black justice who had been
Thurgood Marshall,
and he had to recuse himself because he had been in charge of the case in Atlanta, and so he couldn't vote. So it was slimly lost, but I mean, we wouldn't have the problem we've got with Atlanta public schools now if we didn't sort of segregate all the poor blacks into these inner city schools. I just firmly believe the Supreme Court was right, that children need stimulation from being with people who are different from themselves, and you just put a whole lot of all schools, children from very deprived situations, single parent families, where there's probably never a book in the house, and they don't see anybody who's doing something different. And I think that's exactly what we've needed in the schools, and we don't have it in Atlanta now. And of course, Dr. Krim abolished that program that was working very well with Morningside and the school over here on Boulevard, because they joined those schools, and but he didn't want it.
Which school?
Morningside, and what's the school over here?
Cook.
Not Cook. No, it's the school on Boulevard. I probably closed by now, but it was right in there near the King Center.
Okay. No, it's still there.
Is it still there?
Yeah.
And see, that school and Morningside, they had it worked so that the children went from one to the other, and so the whites all came there 2 days a week, and the blacks all went to Morningside 2 days a week, and it was genuine integration. It was interesting, stimulating.
So they broke up the school week that way.
I never knew exactly how it worked, except that they moved. It was the only time we ever had any whites being moved into a black community, so I guess they did it by grade. I'm not sure just how it worked, but people were very excited about it. But not Dr. Krim wasn't.
Yeah, I know some children who were part of that.
It was really a very creative thing to do, but didn't last. I don't know what's going to happen now. Such a horrible thing for the city to be going through, this school situation. Goodness, I wish your mother was here. She'd know what to do.
Started to say something about the current superintendent, but we're recording this.
You mean the man who's acting?
Yeah.
I don't know anything about it.
Well, he's just retired as chancellor of the university system. So he's been my boss, my boss's boss.
Well, he comes out of a totally corporate background, and so he's telling everybody named in the investigation to resign or be fired.
Yeah, they've got till Wednesday, till tomorrow.
And as I understand it, the rules don't actually allow him to do that. People are entitled to due process.
Well, what are they have their lawyers. What are they saying?
They don't have to.
Yeah.
So he's going to have to in effect prosecute each one of those cases, which I think is probably a good thing, because some of them may have been tarred by association. I'm not totally sure I trust that report to the state.
No, you put a lot of white men from the governor's, from the attorney general's office into these
No, it was the former
intimidating.
attorney general, who was such a scandalous figure himself, who was, because he ran for governor, didn't he?
One of those three people prosecuted my dad.
Really?
For witness tampering. When he called Alice Bond and said, why, just because you're upset, you can't say these kinds of things about people.
Was that Bowers?
Bowers, that's the one. And didn't he run for governor?
Yes.
But it turned out he had a mistress or something, don't you remember?
I just remember not many people thought he would make a good
That's on the
mayor.
record now. Bowers, I'm sure, had a mistress. And he was a scandalous figure. He had to drop out of the race, I think. And why they would put him in charge of this investigation, I can't think. Some distinguished black lawyer should have been in charge, I think, because it's mostly affecting black workers. But
you got this whole, anti-public school thing going on. They just want to do anything that will discredit the public schools. They want to grow up as big as possible, not, as opposed to solving the problem.
I just can't imagine how they're going to work this out. Or who's going to want to take this job.
I see them probably extending Davis another year.
Right.
Well, who appointed him?
The school board apparently, but under some duress, I imagine, from the governor's office, given the threat of abolishing the school board and replacing the members.
Oh, they got that through legislation, didn't they?
They did.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that was that. I don't know anything about EO, but I was touched by his departing speech. It was really when he burst into tears and said these were children like from homes like the one he grew up in, and he wanted to help.
But the interesting thing is that the New York Times reports that the NAEP scores are genuine, which have gone up because they can't be tampered with.
The what scores?
The National Assessment of Educational Progress, the urban districts that they recently started doing with urban districts. And that has shown an improvement in Atlanta's scores. And they say those cannot be tampered.
They haven't been erased.
So it's
not
the
state ones.
So the state ones have been erased. So it's not clear that the fact that there's been cheating means that there hasn't been academic improvement in the schools. That's the irony of it. But I never saw that but the New York Times said that these scores are independently administered. And
I guess I did hear. I had a reading.
But they're a sample. You know, they're not every child. They're a sample. But they're supposed to be a representative sample of school children in an urban district.
Well, maybe what they need to do really is just go in and test the children now with some new and fair approaches and see what actually has happened. I wonder if that wouldn't be possible.
What's your benchmark?
the whole testing issue has become a
Well,
public-
that's just a disaster. I mean, just basing children's progress on. I mean, I never could pass a test in my life. Every time I've had to take a test, I froze. I'm just that way. Everything goes out of my head. Every time I'm on. I remember once I was in the parish where I was. We were going to build a new church, and so the builders came and to meet with the vestry, and I didn't know any of those vestrymen's names. I just looked around, and I had to say, I know we've been working together all these years, but I can't call your names. That's just, I'm just one of those people who, if I'm tested, I can't pass it. And but I'm very bright.
I think you've demonstrated that over the years.
How did your career as a priest progress? You talked about you were an assistant.
Oh,
at
I
St.
was
Luke's,
nominated for bishop once, and I got 1 vote.
That's surely not a political process.
That you said how it progressed.
That's surely not a political process in a church.
No, I had a happy life in the church. I enjoyed parish. I enjoyed being an assistant at St. Luke's, and I was 13 years out at the Mayor's out at St. Bartholomew's, and I had a good time there. And so it was just, it's just wonderful all the way through. No, nothing to complain about.
What was it like during the missing and murdered children's episode?
Oh, it was so dreadful, really. We had just one child, and it was a girl who was abducted and murdered. So I didn't actually know anybody who was, but we were all terrified, And there was some laughs in it. Was one of the I used to get a lot of boys into the Atlanta Boy Choir because it's wonderful for them because it's such strict discipline and all that. And a little boy from East Lake Meadows that I used to take twice a week to the boy choir. And he was about the size of this chair, so he said, I want you to stop. I'm hungry. I need a chicken box. And I said, Ricky, I am not getting you a chicken box. You are twice as fat as you ought to be. He said, when we come to a stop sign, I'm going to roll down this window and yell, kidnap. I bet you get me a chicken box. But there weren't very many laughs. It was a terrible time. And I don't know whether they got the right person or not.
The only indication is that they seem to have stopped.
You know, we don't know that either because the press doesn't pick it up when terrible things happen to poor black children. Mm-hmm. We don't know how many disappear every year, do we? I know that's sort of paranoid, but I do wonder.
Well, that was one of the things that interfered with seeing the pattern in the first place.
Yeah.
Is that one of the things that came out was that these children were dying
already. Yeah.
Already, and so it took a while to see a pattern.
But goodness knows, somebody was doing it.
Yeah.
And,
what efforts did you put forth with business leaders, with political leaders and others as the drama was going on?
I didn't really have anything to do with that. They were completely engaged, I think. They were desperate to do what could be done. And all we did was just try to protect the children that we knew and to be sure that they were properly escorted and not left alone and things like that. And the idea for the study hall really sort of grew out of that because, we had so many children from single-parent families who went home to an empty house. And so we wanted something for them to go to after school. So that's where the study hall came
from. Then we had the Bowen Homes boiler tragedy during that whole episode. That helped Mayor Jackson and the business leadership work together really for the first time.
I hadn't realized that.
That's always been my impression, that they had been sort of publicly for Atlanta at war with one another. And then
they hated Maynard Jackson.
All of a sudden they had to fix that boiler and rebuild that daycare facility.
I didn't know. I knew there had been an explosion, but I didn't know what the results of that were. But in the end, I think they really did have to. They had to admire his ability because he pushed through that airport. There was no question about that. But Stevens and Wilkinson were the architects for that, and I knew a lot of those people, and they came out of that with tremendous admiration for his ability.
They were the architects for what?
The airport.
The airport.
So why did you say the business community hated Maynard in the beginning?
Oh yes, he was just they didn't want a black mayor to begin with, and he was certainly outspoken. And he was just, he was determined to have his way.
Do you think that people in poor black communities benefited from policies under Maynard Jackson and Mayor Young?
The big benefit was that for the first time they had access. and they just really didn't feel that they belonged. They had any standing here, and all of a sudden, if they went to the city hall, they could see anybody they wanted to see, and they could complain about things, and so on. Not that they wanted your father to be mayor. I mean, to be governor. They were all against that. Did you know that?
Which they?
Blacks.
Oh, really?
Yes. I was driving the school bus down to Reedsville, the state prison, loaded with 44 black women going down to visit their relatives. So at one point we'd stop for gas or something. So I said, now I want to find out how many of you are going to vote for Zell Miller for governor, and how many of you are going to vote for Andrew Young. They were all going to vote for Zell Miller. And I said, it's gambling. You all just want the lottery. You don't care anything about what's going to happen to your children or your homes or anything. You get through to them, they wanted to gamble. And that lottery was what elected him. And Lord, if they didn't live to regret that. Mercy, he was dreadful. I said, he came to the state capitol with Lester Maddox. You want Lester back? No, they didn't want Lester back. They did want the lottery.
So you said the access black court.
That was a major thing. I mean, the city really had so little to do with things that affected blacks. I mean, they didn't run the school system. They didn't run the welfare department. They didn't do the health department. The things that really affected daily life for poor people in the city had very little to do with. How public housing was about the only thing.
Did the administration of public housing get any better?
It got a lot better, and stayed better really for a long time, but I lost touch. See, I've been out for 15 years, so I really...
Well, we're kind of talking about the period, sort of Ivan Allen, Maynard Jackson, Indiana.
I thought conditions in public housing were pretty good, really. And there was a lot going on, a lot of community activity, a lot of educational programs and things of that sort. And I was astonished, really, when they started, when the Clinton administration started all this business about getting rid of public housing. Because our public housing was not like Chicago. These weren't 30-story buildings, and everybody in there was a criminal. I've been on the shelf for so long now, I didn't know what was happening. But it wouldn't have happened if I could have stopped it, I can tell you that.
The impression I've always had is that Maynard Jackson was a big supporter of public housing in the city and really tried to do things such as investing in the rehabilitation of East Lake Meadows, for example.
Well, the one that I was closest to was the one up here on Capitol Homes, and it was completely refurbished, and the people were allowed to have little gardens, and I don't know, I thought things were going pretty well.
So you thought MARTA was an important thing for the city?
Well, I thought it was at the time, but in the end, I think we would have been much better just to have a really good bus system. For a while, after we got the trains, we got buses. But now, for example, I don't have a bus at all. one of the reasons I wanted to move here was the bus came right here and went all the way out Peachtree to Lenox Road and out that way. Now the only bus goes down George Avenue and goes to the downtown station, and you get to the downtown station, you can't get anywhere from there. But we don't have a grocery store in all this area, and it's just it's difficult now.
Well, how was the impact of the 15 cent?
Of course, that was wonderful, and there were 3 or 4 buses in this area, and you could get a bus and go anywhere. All that is certainly over now.
So it was almost the better times was while they were building it. You still had the buses.
Oh yes.
And you had the 15 cent fare.
Oh yeah. That was tremendous. And now you got $2 fares and no buses. It takes people all day to get anywhere. I tried, because I like to shop at Ansley Mall because all the sorts of things there that I need.
Yeah.
And it's pretty much the closest thing I can get to. And after they canceled my bus, I tried taking the bus to 5 Points and then taking the train to the Arts Center. And then I waited 45 minutes on a bus to get to Ansley Mall. It's just it's hopeless, really. You can't negotiate it.
Right. And you should be able to just have a bus go right down Boulevard to Ansley.
Exactly so.
Yeah.
We need buses. So, I don't know. I wonder if somebody private would take on that challenge. I think it could be a success. I don't know how the streetcar's going to do.
Yeah.
It's certainly not going to serve poor communities, but it's interesting to think about it. And it will certainly make a lot of jobs.
Right.
And do a lot for the tourist industry, and goodness knows that's helpful. So.
Is that helpful for poor communities when the tourism?
Well, I think anything that produces income is helpful to poor communities. And
some of the kids who came up through Emmaus House, where did they find jobs? I noticed Betty Eubanks works for the city.
Yeah, a lot of them working for the city. And I went to see a friend who's living in that, what's that big apartment house there between Juniper and Peachtree? I forget what it's called. Anyway, I went in there and I looked at this woman who was there as a concierge. And sure enough, she grew up at Emmaus House. And I remembered her so well because she had, her mother was completely depressed and never got out of bed. She had 2 brothers, and the community sort of brought those children up. But they went to school every day, and it was so interesting to see her after being gone for 15 years. And I said, "What are you doing?" She said, "Well, I'm just getting ready to take my I'm getting a PhD at West Georgia College." And I asked about her brothers. One of them is a FBI agent in Los Angeles. A lot of the good things have happened. You remember Silva Griggs? She was one of the children there when you were there. I was talking to her the other day. She's getting ready to move to Haiti because one of the young people who worked there as a volunteer has been teaching school in Los Angeles all these years and is now about to retire. And she's very much involved with Haitian organization and so on, has a house down there. So Silva's going to move down there next year to plunge into community health and things like that. I mean, it's so exciting to find out how people have put their lives together in spite of many obstacles.
If they have something for support.
Yes, I think it's the encouragement more than anything else. If people really believe in you and know your name and say how's it going and can I help. It just really gives them a lot. One of the young people is now admissions officer at Trinity College in Connecticut. You know, those summer camps really did a lot for the Emmaus House children. Were you in on that? Or did that group, do you know how that started?
No.
Well, it started out of the kidnapping. I had a cousin who lives somewhere down Washington County. But anyway, she had a child in one of those main camps. And she asked me if I thought any of our children would like to go to main camp. And I said, sure, they all would. And so she talked to her camp director, who got in touch with me, and then got in touch. We had, I think, about 25 camps in Maine that took children. And those camps go on for, they go for 6 and 8 weeks.
Yeah.
So we had children up there. Yeah. And they met a lot of people that got interested in them. And that's how this kid got on at Trinity College, because somebody from there was something at the college. But a lot of them have really gained from those exposures to that. Because they were mostly, those camps are terribly expensive.
Oh, yeah.
So they were thrown up there with a lot of rich white kids. Right. And you know how interesting our children are. You're one of those who do know. And how sort of just stimulating they can be, and how there are different approaches to questions and so on. So they made their way in a lot of instances that way.
Go ahead.
What about Grady? Because there have been several battles to try to keep. I know you mentioned that one of the bad things is when you leave Fulton County, you lose access to Grady.
Yeah, that is worrying. But I'm so relieved that Grady didn't close, because so many public hospitals didn't they? All around the country. And it used to be 2 Gradys. And blacks of my age still called it the Gradys, because there was a white one and a black one. But I think Grady's doing. I think they're just doing good work, staying open in a way.
So that's always been sort of a lifeline for communities.
Yes, and it was wonderful, because Atlanta really, they're always talking about cutting off the money and so on. And at some point I said, Atlanta had Grady Hospital when it was paid for out of property taxes. It's something that people have cared about always.
Why is that? Why do you think there's been that support for Grady?
There's a lot of there was a lot of good leadership here, black and white. The blacks got that, the hospital for children, which is now part of Eggleston. Do you know how the black leadership organized itself to get things done? When everything was run by the Democratic white primary, they couldn't vote, but they could vote in general elections. Do you know about this?
A little bit, but go on, talk to me.
Well, they just got their heads together, and what comes up in general elections is bond issues, streets and sidewalks and schools and all those things. And they got together, and they just, for about 3 years, they defeated everything that came up. And finally, this was in the 20s, finally the white leadership came to them and said, what is it you want? Well, to start with, we want a high school. They did not have one in Atlanta until 1926. Every other southern community had them, but Atlanta did not. And so from then on, they had figured out how to get things done. They were just threatened to defeat the next bond issue.
So that's where they got Hugh Spalding?
They got everything that way. Because, well, finally, of course, but not until the 60s did they really get an overall vote.
Right.
And it's really a wonderful example of how people can somehow make a system work even when it was meant not to work. I think when your father was elected to Congress, I think that was the first time a majority white district in the South sent a black man to Congress, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I looked for that in that paper that Carolyn sent, but I don't know that I might have missed it. But it was a very important thing.
Why do you think whites voted for him?
Well, partly because he was such an attractive candidate, and partly, I think, because there were a lot of decent people who wanted it. So, black and white. But it's all my friends in North Carolina who are always telling me how much better they are than we are. I point out to them that you had to draw a snake all across North Carolina to elect a black to Congress.
Right.
And we did it. we did it from the goodness of our heart way back under.
They had the I-85 district.
Yeah.
So what happened when he ran for mayor and the white business community decided they wanted Sidney Marcus?
Oh, yes. Well, I don't think Sidney Marcus ever had a chance, do you? But I don't know. I don't know what the Ivan Allen community did. I know Ivan Allen supported Cook against Marcel, but because there was a lot of outcry about him going Republican. But
you think that was just because Marcel was Jewish?
Jewish, and also because they didn't trust him, because he did have a lot of suspect connections. But I think it was partly because he was Jewish, and of course he was very competent. I mean, he could get a lot of things done. He got MARTA done, but he had the worst police department in the South. I mean, that was a terrible business. I think we had something like 57 police brutality cases in those 4 years. No, I don't remember. I know quite a few blacks around me worked for Sidney Marcus. I shouldn't be ranting on them about this, but anyway I will, because they took his money for passing out his leaflets and threw them away.
No wonder those votes didn't come through.
Oh, Lord.
So they weren't shuffling and grinning after all.
But there was somebody prominent, though, that Maynard was talking about in terms of people supporting it. Billy McKinney supported Marcus, I think.
Billy McKinney was against every good thing.
Well, he was one of the black police officers with a reputation for brutality.
Don't feel guilty about Billy McKinney. We got him out of the drunk tank. Because they wouldn't let a black ride a motorcycle, and so this became an issue. We had black policemen, but they couldn't ride motorcycles. So the concerned black clergy got together, and we decided we were going to go down and protest this. Well, they didn't show up, but the welfare rights did, And so we protested day after day after day about the blacks not being allowed to ride motorcycles. So they gave in, and what they gave us was Billy McKinney. Wearing that little noose in his pocket that, you know, that showed how much he was in favor of capital punishment. He was just terrible. I thought, Lord.
So this is the real reason for all this opposition to welfare, because the women on welfare were good troops for organizing for.
Yes, they just really cared about issues that affected poor folks, whether they were black women or what. Yeah. I remember when the state was going to cut off all that. Oh, let me tell you something about what happened. About you know, in that surplus commodities, there was a lot of stuff that people didn't want, like powdered milk and that white Karo syrup and things like that. And so they would give it back to the people who delivered it. And one of them, in fact, it was a doctor at Grady who said, you know, you could make a child a formula for feeding babies with that white syrup and powdered milk and vitamins. And this was Judge Tuttle's son. And so he got a bunch of Grady doctors together, and they invented the formula. And then we began to enroll children, infants, you know, in this. And they would come once a week to get a supply of food. And we kept records on that to show what happened to children, babies who were adequately nourished. But what made me think of it was that what we were doing was illegal, because you were supposed to return that stuff to the Department of Agriculture, and we were using it. And somebody reported us. So somebody at the welfare department found out and told me. So we were going to be raided, and there was
for feeding babies.
But there was a black what was, you know, the controversial black organization that later got in so much trouble, the Black Panthers. They had a chapter out there. So I told them we were going to be raided. Let me tell you, by the time they got there, you'd never have known anything had ever been in that warehouse. All that stuff was gone. I have a kind feeling for the Black Panthers.
They moved the formula out.
They did. They kept us from being prosecuted by the Agriculture Department. But we went right back to it. I don't think they ever did any more about it, so far as I knew. I guess they decided it was a bum tip, and so maybe we weren't guilty. But we kept very valuable records about that, and testified when the program for
Women's indigent children.
when that came up, we had some very interesting records to show, because we also had a control group of children who were not in that program, and showed how important it was to nourish children.
Did you see a difference when we did get the food stamp program?
It was so much better, you know, because people could then go and buy their groceries, get things that they needed, and so much of that food was just, it wasn't really meant to help the poor. It was meant to help the farmers, you know, and it was stuff that would raise the price of agricultural products and things like that, rather than giving adequate nourishment to the poor. Sometimes you got good things, but still, a lot of it they didn't want anyway. Food stamps were tremendous.
I've always wondered what became of the surplus commodities once they did away with that.
Well, I wonder too.
I think some of them went in the school.
I think they still get it. I think it still happens, doesn't it? And goes to schools, and probably to food banks and things like that. Because I think the program still exists, but it wouldn't be as vigorous as it was when every poor person could But I remember when they first started it in the 30s, they wouldn't certify anybody black to get it, because my mother used to take black women that she knew to the welfare department and insist they enroll them. But a lot of people did that. Especially wasn't unique to my mother. But you had to have somebody white to go with you, or they wouldn't register you. That's what it was like in those days. So awful.
So how you holding up?
You mean it's the time? I don't have anything to do. I'm fine. You want a coat now? I can get you one.
How's your
I'm
team
okay.
doing?
I'm okay.
Take a little break and do a coat.
Oh, good. I was about to tell you. I was going to
Does the episcopacy or the episcopal structure of your church help someone like you maintain an independence that other clergy might not have been able to?
They have a very good pension system. They take, 13% of your salary and invest it in the pension fund all the way through. So,
Well, but could you have been more prophetic within your episcopal structure than, say, a Baptist or Congregationalist or someone else who depended on a local congregation?
well, certainly more than Baptists. Congregationalists can be quite, if you could carry your congregation with you, you'd be fine. And I think it would vary really from parish to parish. You'd have to have your parish behind you if you were going to do something controversial. Otherwise, you might, just be out on your ear. But strictly speaking, we can't be fired, except for moral failure. But people can stop donating. No, I never. But I just had good luck all the way through, because I went to a parish that was just starting, and
That was St. Bartholomew?
And I was the first priest there, and so I tried to make it clear from the beginning what my position on racial issues was and things like that. So people who didn't want that didn't come there. So.
How did you get the music program started that's become so remarkable?
Well, most of that came after I was there.
Okay.
All we had was just an organ and an organist, but somebody gave them a lot of money. See, I was there from 55 to 67, so most of that. But it was, but those were good years for me, and they put up with a lot from me, because those were the years, you see, when we were just starting to integrate schools and things like that. Got involved with a lot of those things.
What kind of cross-racial dialogue happened in Atlanta? Because you said you went around the state trying to promote black and white.
Well, we had the Atlanta Council on Human Relations that Eliza Pascal chaired, and the Georgia Council, which operated outside the city and around the state, which Francis Pauley chaired. And so both of them were quite active and aggressive. Eliza was really a lightning rod. She, in some ways, I think she really liked to fight. She would just, I don't know, she really could, she got very upset with Central Presbyterian Church, which really had a lot of good liberal causes going on there. But she found out that daycare program there was not integrated. So she organized a campaign against them. And I said, but there's so many worse things that you could do, but worse places that you could attack that really are active in racial hostility. Why not go after them first and then take on Central Presbyterian? No, she liked to fight. And and she had a lot of black pastors working with her and helping with all those things. So that was, but she and Francis Paula didn't get along. They fought tooth and nail. There was a lot of competition in that community that those of us who were just volunteers really didn't cotton to, you know. We just thought we'd get on with it. But a lot of the professionals really did fight each other. Nobody was ever liberal enough.
So in terms of sort of at the community level, was there any sort of active of trying to get people from different communities, black and white, to meet together or talk together in that time?
Yes, you see, the Atlanta Council did that, and the Georgia Council did that, and they brought people together across racial lines, and the YWCA did a lot. Because I remember there was a wonderful old lady who was retired from the Girl Scouts, who and she had something at the YWCA, and she decided to organize interracial dances. And I said, you're really starting at the top. But she got it going. She had these several hundred people down there dancing black and white together. This was in the 50s.
Dancing by itself was controversial.
Yeah, yes, a lot of the churches didn't want any dancing at all. So there were a lot of times when you, and of course we were working hard to integrate the library, which was totally segregated, and I think it was some of Maynard Jackson's family that were the first blacks to become members of the library. But really, Atlanta, it has a better reputation than it deserved.
I think one of the best descriptions of that is Frederick Allen's book, Atlanta Rising, where he says that Atlanta looks liberal in relationship to the rest of Georgia. And that Ivan Allen and others were very conscious of that.
Mm-hmm.
That we look so much more liberal than we really are because we're surrounded by Georgia and then other southern cities that were not acting in any way to even appear liberal.
Yeah, and Atlanta knew how to look at the bottom line and see what it was going to cost if they had a lot of trouble. So,
well, when we did have trouble, like in 1906,
oh yeah,
the aftermath was immediately denounced because of its impact on business. And the tourism industry, for example, we had a convention scheduled about a month later, and to have national headlines saying had been a race riot in Atlanta, the druggists didn't want to come and meet in Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
And yet the Druggist Association meeting was being sponsored locally by our favorite soft drink maker.
And of course, Mr. Woodruff was nobody's liberal.
True. But he wanted to sell soft drinks around the world.
He certainly, but he wouldn't, for example, when Dr. White retired as president of Emory, Mr. Woodruff wouldn't let them invite the black presidents to the installation of the new president.
When was that?
Well, it would have been in the 60s, I guess. No, earlier than that. Where was I? I think I was at St. Bartholomew's then. But a lot of Emory people were parishioners there. And when the new president was installed, the ones who were so upset about that went out and had a sit-in at Sisters Chapel at Spelman, rather than attend the installation of the new president. But Mr. Woodruff did not like blacks.
So it was just purely a public image thing for him?
I think he just sincerely didn't like blacks. And I don't know. I know when we were having in fact, it was the husband of this woman who got in so much trouble, with the Department of Agriculture.
Sherrod.
Charles Sherrod. And he was a young man. And this would be in the early 60s, I guess. And it was a demonstration in Newton County, which is where Mr. Woodruff's plantation is. And the police beat Charles Sherrod up and broke his leg. And Frances Pauley, who was head of the Georgia Council on Human Relations, put him in her car and took him to the hospital in Albany, but they wouldn't see him. They wouldn't let him in. And finally took him to a private doctor who would see blacks and would set his leg. And then a group from the Georgia Council persuaded, he didn't want to do anything because he was totally nonviolent. He didn't think he should fight. And they took him on his crutches to Mr. Woodruff's office, and he wouldn't see him. See, because Mr. Woodruff was in that county, it seemed to people who saw it that he might have some influence on how the police behaved down there, but he wasn't interested. But who was interested was his assistant in that office, who was so sort of inspired by Charles Sherrod that he immersed himself in black causes. He gave a lot of money and built buildings for the daycare center out here, and he gave some money to the medical care for Charles Sherrod, but it was
Who was that?
His last name was Jones, and that center.
Beausoleil?
No, not Beausoleil. No, I didn't mean to say it in that tone because I don't know, but this was way before Beausoleil Jones. No, there's a center at the daycare center over there. What's it called? I used to be on that board. I should know. The main one over on the south side. He built the building that is named for him because he paid for it, and he did a lot of good things in there. No, Beausoleil Jones was that was much later. I'll tell you a funny story about him though. There was a woman. She's still very active in interracial things in Mississippi, but she was head of something here called the Children's Foundation, and she had just come and she was trying to build the organization up, and she had an appointment with the Woodruff Foundation, so she went over there and somebody showed her to a seat. The man came in and sort of visited with her, and time went by, and finally she looked at her watch and said, well, I really had an appointment with Mr. Jones and I'm going to have to get back to my office. And he said, well, I am Mr. Jones. I was in the office actually when she came back. She came in just like this. She said, Beausoleil Jones. Who in the hell ever heard of a white man being named Beausoleil Jones?
This is a black woman?
Yeah. A unique Fitzgerald.
Oleta Fitzgerald?
Oleta Fitzgerald, yeah. Yeah, she was head of the Children's Foundation here until it folded and went back to Mississippi. She's now she runs the Mississippi branch of that thing that Charles Sherrod's wife runs in Georgia. You know, what's it called? It's employment for black women, and there's one in Mississippi, Georgia, and Alabama.
Rural development.
Southern women for something, and she runs that in Mississippi. She's still going.
This must not be Olita. This will be another Fitzgerald. Because Olita seems like would be too young for this.
Olita's got grandchildren now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. She just looks younger than.
She does.
Well, a lot of blacks don't wither the way whites do.
Well, you know if they say black don't crack.
Is that what it is? That's a good line. No, Olita's plenty old. She just hadn't aged.
Yeah, no, she doesn't. She looks fabulous. Well, we just get 50 and stop.
Yeah, black women still do look much younger than they are. And, yeah.
So talk. You mentioned Joe Boone. You have any? What were some good things you all did together?
Oh, he was just so dear to me. He was awful, but he was wonderful too. He was just for integrating anything, we certainly worked hard on the schools, getting the schools integrated and voter registration and all that sort of thing. I remember he said to Dr. Mays once, "You're just so much against everything, we're going to buy you a ticket and send you on a trip around the world and get it all done while you're gone."
What was he against?
Dr. Mays, school integration. When he was president of the school board, one of the schools out there in Buckhead, in those days blacks could go to the school. You could move at Thanksgiving holidays, and a whole bunch of black children were scheduled to go out there to that school. I was on Northside Drive, and they wouldn't release the seat tickets. That's where all the records are for a child. A child has a seat ticket, and the school wouldn't release them, so the new school wouldn't know where to put them. And I called Dr. Mays. He was having his Thanksgiving dinner, and he said, "I am not interested in this issue." I said, "But Dr. Mays, when those children, 200 children, get to that all-white school Monday morning, the press is going to be there, and it's going to look bad, and probably look bad for you." Well, anyway, he did it, but he didn't want to.
This was going to Northside High School?
This wasn't, no, this was an elementary school, and it was the one, I forget the name of it. It was the one that all the Jews went to, and
Northside Drive?
It was on Northside Drive, as I remember. It was right in there. But that school is closed since. The Jews pulled out pretty much and started private schools after that, because they didn't want it either.
So did you ever understand why Dr. Mays was not interested in integration?
I think it was because his wife was dead and gone, and wasn't there to tell him what to think. She was the most amazing woman, and she used to have a wonderful lecture, and that turned into a book called "Why I'm Glad I'm Not White." You should get that. It's available. And she was amazing. And she used to have integrated picnics on the campus over there, and And she could say such funny things about integration and whites didn't want it or whites did want it or whatever. She was a sight. But I think Dr. Mays, it might have been just because he was old, but he was so flattered by the white community here. They just made over him all the time, and I don't know. He had had such a distinguished past. It's too bad to have those memories of him, but he was terrible as president of the school board.
And that we could talk about some of that phenomenon. Because it does seem to be there's a black professor at University of Virginia who's written a book about how the first wave of black leadership then was not, like Lonnie King, then was not in tune with the aspirations of the welfare rights and the poor.
They just really weren't, and it was. And school teachers generally, they were very difficult. Because I remember how Dr. King used to fight with them, because they just, a lot of them had sort of cushy situations. And who was the woman who was head of the school system here? And when she was ever going to hire a black teacher, she would have her come to sit at her house. I heard this from one of them she hired. And she had 2 rocking chairs. And she said, you would just sit there and rock for a little while, and finally she would say, now how do you feel about things? Do you think things are going pretty well, or should there be changes? Oh no, ma'am, I think things are just going fine.
This is a superintendent?
Yeah. Dr. Letson. It was something. Atlanta got away with a lot for a long time.
So what kinds of things did Joe Boone, what did you all work on integrating?
Oh, the hospital out there, he didn't like the way that was going. The black hospital, I forget, that the nuns ran.
Oh, Holy Family?
I forget why we protested out there. I know we all got arrested out there, I remember. Like, Joe just made you do things. He didn't always make it clear why you had to do them. You just wound up in jail. And and then we had a big thing over the welfare cuts, and we all took signs into the legislature, and the speaker had us all locked up. And he.
This was when Zell Miller was governor?
No, this was before, I guess. Maybe Zell was governor by then. I'm not sure, but Joe could get you locked up. I'm telling you, at the drop of a hat. I remember saying to some policeman, I said, I just came out here with Reverend Joe Boone, and I'm not going to do anything to disrupt the law because I've got something I've got to do this afternoon. He said, forget that, we're locking you up. Oh, Lord. And we worked on integrating schools, integrating clinics, and all sorts of different, and stores. We went in stores and found in black communities and found they were selling rotten stuff, so we closed them down. It really was. Part of it was Joe really liked to fight, and some of it I wouldn't have really chosen to do, but if he told me to do it, I had to do it. We were such charms, I couldn't go against him. And he really did care about poor people.
Did he have a church?
Yes, the Congregational Church over there, at the AU.
Okay.
He was pastor there. I think he's kind of fallen on hard times now,
But that wasn't enough to really support him, was it? Did he?
No, he did. He had all kinds of businesses going, you know, grocery businesses, and also we would. People accused him of taking money from organizations and so on. I never knew that, but he took me all over the country. We went to. We had a sit-in at Ford Motors, I remember, in Detroit, making them hire blacks. And then we went to Chicago to make Greyhound hire blacks. And I forget where else. We went everywhere. We went all over. We went all over the state too. Every time he thought something ought to change, off we went, and he'd call up and say, we have this to do. So I was just in Joe's wake for years. He was a wonderful person in so many ways.
Is he affiliated now with?
He's dead now. He's dead now.
He's dead now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
He died a good many years back, and he was out of it for a long time. He had, a hardening of the arteries. He for about 5 years before he died, he really hardly knew anything. It was very sad.
His daughter works for the mayor now.
His daughter is commissioner. Isn't this amazing? She said, "I know my daddy would be so ashamed of me."
Join the establishment.
Yes, she's got a Cadillac. I said, he'd be ashamed of you if you do the wrong thing, but he wouldn't be ashamed of you for driving a Cadillac. Yeah, she's.
So what do you think Atlanta would be like if it hadn't been for, people like Joe Boone and Ethel Matthews?
And your father and Maynard Jackson and a lot of people who didn't get along with each other changed the city and made it what it has been, really, a sort of humanitarian lighthouse in the nation. And then this that's what's so distressing about scandals and things when they come up. We have had such a wonderful, it's been an inspiration, I think, to other places, what's been achieved here. So you have to worry.
So how would you describe some of the achievements?
Well, I think, like when you walk in the city hall or the health department, it's everything's black. That's an exaggeration. Of course, not everything's black, but I think a city that's a majority black population is now operates as what it is. And it was just so bad in the old days, just run by a group of elitist whites and told the blacks what to do and what not to do. I think the greatest change has been in the way black people think about themselves. Because you used to pass blacks on the sidewalk, and they just looked so downcast. And now you pass them and they say, "What's up?" And just the feeling that it's their city, and they can. I think one of the problems now is that it's very hard to get anything organized to make things better, because people think they're going to automatically get better because they have gotten better. And it's just that the lack of very, very much civic organization here is startling. There's just like the so-called concerned black clergy. They allowed all this public housing to be torn down without saying a word, and things like that, and all those. I think one of the things is people think things are going to get better, and will get better no matter what. So that's gonna. I don't know what it takes, but also I think it's not Atlanta, and it's not the black community. It's America. I think people are so turned in on themselves now, and so concentrated on. I know in the Episcopal Church, I'm just all we talk about, all we work on really is sexual things, you know. Who can get married, interracial marriage, and same-sex marriage, and all that sort of thing. The church is just so absorbed in its own affairs that it's just very difficult to get anybody concerned about what's going on in the world.
There seems to be less diversity of opinion. I mean, when you talk about a bishop who was brought up before the McCarthy hearings of being a communist.
You wouldn't get that now, would you? No, I don't know when the governor's trying to raise the sales tax and put it on groceries. I kept calling around various clergymen that I knew and things like, nobody really did anything about that. I mean, in the church, I couldn't get the church alarmed about this, and goodness knows we fought hard to get it off, and it just seems so strange, the lack of real interest in the community at large. Well, I'm speaking only for the Episcopal Church. I don't really know what goes on otherwhere. And not being able to read much, I'm just at sea a lot of the time, because I can't. I'm dependent on I do get somebody to come in and read the paper sometime, but otherwise I'm dependent on the public news, and it's not very adequate. So a lot of what's going on I don't know about. Couldn't do anything about it if I did, but still, you like to think you would.
Yeah, I know there was the analysis of tax proposals. I mean, it was insult to injury, because not only were they raising the tax on groceries, but then they were also eliminating some of the tax deductions for poor people.
Yes.
They were making the overall tax code more regressive.
Exactly so. And even putting it on haircuts and stuff like that. They wanted to.
And we did the analysis for it, and then got in a lot of trouble, and so they said, well, we'll take the business to the University of Georgia. Simply because they didn't like the numbers.
Really? That's I didn't even know about that, but I can believe it. It's
Because they don't want. I mean, and that's, I guess that's the thing too, is that people aren't willing to argue the facts. They want to change the facts.
it just really is so astounding to see people, see what's happening to so many people. That's starting early in the morning. There's the Russian church up the street has a soup kitchen, and starting a long line of black men walking down the street. And I don't even know where they live. A lot of them sleep in the park in the summertime. And I can lighten that too. I was walking over there one day, and I got in conversation with a man who'd been sleeping over there in the park. And he told me about himself. He said he came here from, I forget where he said. He said, I was going to Cincinnati, but my sister told me not to go there. I said, that's the most racist city in the country. You'd do better to go to Atlanta. So he said, so I came here. And he said, nobody's done anything to help me. He said, I eat out of these soup kitchens and things like that, but nobody's offered me a job. I said, well, that's not the way it works, really. But anyway, we had quite a long conversation. And then he told me that all the different things he had done in his life and the things he'd accomplished. And so I said, well, you're so talented, it's too bad you don't have children, assuming you don't. Oh, I've had children, he said. I was married to this little Indian woman. She about this tall. He said, we had several children. Turned out she was eating them. You know, they do that. I said, you know what I think you could make a living at? Having a TV show. You could just get on it and spin your yarns.
Where was he from?
Somewhere up north, Philadelphia, I think. And he was just a homeless man, but he was so, he really could have had a TV show talking about his little Indian woman wife who ate the children. Yeah. One day I fell over there. I was walking the dog and I skidded and just skidded down the bank. I wasn't hurt. But there was a man standing down there, another homeless man. And he held the dog while I got up. And he said, you know what you need? I said, what do I need? Apart from knowing better where I'm going. He said, you need golf shoes. He said, I said, well, what do you know about golf shoes? You're over here homeless. He said, well, I know about golf shoes and you need some. You can really have adventures over there. But a lot of them sleep in the park, and they've got cushions out of cars that they place over there, and then they coat them in plastic, see, so they don't ruin in the wet. But I don't know. A lot of them are afraid to stay in the shelters because they say they're so dangerous.
I think you've been very generous with your time.
Well, I probably talk too much, but then when you live alone, you get into that.
Well, no, this is one occasion where there's no such thing.
You're a dear, thank you. What's happening with your life? What you doing?
Well, I am working with the Andrew Young Foundation.
Uh-huh.
And so one of the reasons we're trying to do this, and with I'm on the advisory board at the Andrew Young Policy School at Georgia State.
Oh, yeah.
Harvey is the chair of the...
But they don't pay you for that.
They don't.
I know that. Shame on them. They got plenty of money.
No. We're a state agency.
Don't listen to that.
So we've raised a little bit of money to do this project.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I have the brochure.
And
the cane.
Okay. And so I have, we'll start up some things, some lectures and things like that in the fall. So now you're on our mailing list. We'll be sure to let you know. But so we do. I came here to work with the Southern. Well, I wanted to come back to Atlanta. My daughter had graduated from high school.
How old is she now?
She's 23.
23.
And she
Goodness.
finished University of Georgia, but she worked for a while with the union.
Uh-huh.
But she got very distressed over it because, it's a terrible time to try to organize people. And if they get fired, there's nothing you can do about it. If
Yeah.
they get fired before they vote the union.
Uh-huh.
And so she, it was an interesting thing for her because she lived a fairly privileged life.
This is very good. That's wonderful. And she's where now?
And she's now waiting to start Georgia State in the fall. She's going to go get a graduate degree in economics. So her father's going to try to talk her into.
Oh, that's great. Good for her.
I think she should be in public policy, but.
And is she your only child?
She's my only child.
Goodness, I remember when you married.
Yeah. Yes, you sent me the very first wedding present that I received.
Did
I still have it.
Oh, how nice!
I still have
I'm thrilled. Your mother, who always opened her mouth and said whatever was in there, said, "Well, Andrea said, even if you were fighting with my father, your father, I was to be invited to your wedding."
It's interesting. I don't. Well, I have interesting. So we were interviewing somebody yesterday, Henrietta Antonine.
Oh yes.
And so she was saying how, she said, "I hope you won't be mad at me." She said, "But I booed your father when he opposed the minority plank at the Democratic convention." And Jesse Jackson and the Black Caucus and all that, were on one side, and Daddy spoke for the Democratic committees.
Oh.
I said, I think he was wrong on the merits on that one. So, he and I don't always agree on some of these policies, but that was. No, I remember getting that gift and your note. It was quite. I married a minister, so he sent me this very elaborate German punch.
Oh, I remember that.
With all kind of bas relief on it, and so his note, as you can see, he's.
What a memory you have.
He's a very. Well, you're an important person in my life.
Oh, thank you, darling. That's a lovely thing to
the
hear.
Opportunity to work with, the youth, what my mother did. We were in Jack and Jill. You know where Jack and Jill was? So we were in Jack and Jill. My mother was head of the teen group of Jack and Jill when I was in there. She said, "You are not going to spend your time doing society things and all that." So what we had to do was, you can have your activities, but you have to partner with kids from Emmaus House. And so your activities are basically taking them to Six Flags, taking them to the park, that was our activity.
Uh-huh.
And so we came over to Emmaus House, and Father Ford matched us up with some kids, and Betty Eubanks and her brother, two of her brothers were one of them.
That's marvelous. That's really great
That's
to hear.
what we did.
I remember you there. We had Emmaus House was a fun place to be, wasn't it? It was. We had such good times.
And so it meant that we did something really, meaningful instead of, just entertaining ourselves.
Well,
And we still entertained ourselves because, like you said, these kids were hysterical.
They were.
They were some characters.
Oh, it was really astonishing.
Yeah. And you just hope that, you had some. So I'm glad to know that, Betty has a good job with health benefits.
Yes, and you remember her mother?
I don't remember her mother.
Well, her mother was unbelievable. She was such a character, and a huge family, and all different. One of the sons, I forget what he did, something criminal. Anyway, he went to prison, and when he got out, he would come to church every Sunday. And he said, "I just need about 5 minutes with the children." And then he would talk to them about what had gone wrong in his life and how he didn't want it to happen to them. It was really astonishing. I forget how many children Miss Eubanks had, but you remember Sister Marie. She was a nun who worked there, and she was, well, one word that comes to mind when you think of Sister Marie is aggressive. And one of the Eubanks children had done something that displeased her, and so she went up to Miss Eubanks' house, and typical of her, she just went in, and Miss Eubanks was in bed with a man. So Sister Marie starts in on what Chuck had done, and Miss Eubanks sits up in bed and said, "Sister, let us be civilized. First, let me introduce my boyfriend to you." And then later on, Miss Eubanks decided she was going to feed the hungry. And so she started, and I mean, she got all the volunteers at the mayor's house helping her do all this cooking and everything. And it was amazing how many people she had coming. I don't know how long, of course she died ultimately, but she really, she had a lot going down there. I mean, she fed a lot of hungry people, but she was, there was nobody quite like her. And now, I don't know what's happened to Chuck. He's the one that was always in trouble. He's not the one that talked to the children. That one actually got later murdered himself. He was, I don't know, he never got in any trouble again. He really spent whatever years he had left trying to keep children out of trouble. But he was, I forget how it happened, but he got murdered. So many people did around there. But Miss Eubanks was a character and a half.
So I guess we need to go to the table so you can sign the...
Oh, let's get right over here. Just around the corner there.
How did you say, swing myself up? Is it?
Yeah. It usually takes about 3. See, that does it. You see.
You did a good job. Good job.
That's a book on tape.